My mother lowered her voice, guarding her words like an aristocratic secret. Your sister is inches away from a new life. Do not let your children ruin her image. I said I understood and hung up, officially eliminated from Christmas dinner. What they did not know is that the coastal mansion they rented to play pretend wealth is mine. The woman they hid away holds the keys to their night, their reputation, and their final hidden debt. My name is Skylar Parker. I am 36 years old, raising 2 young children on my own in a world that rarely hands out second chances. For as long as I can remember, I have been the functional background noise of my own family. I am the one who handles the logistics, the one who absorbs the shocks, the one who is expected to nod and step aside when the spotlight swings toward my younger sister. I have grown accustomed to the quiet indignity of favoritism. It is a familiar garment, one I learned to wear with a stoic grace because fighting it only ever made me look bitter. But there is a distinct difference between being overlooked and being actively erased. It happened exactly 3 days before Christmas. The air outside my office window was crisp, the streets lined with festive lights that blurred into a comforting glow. Inside, my phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed the name Marjorie Parker, my mother. I answered on the second ring, expecting a frantic demand about a last-minute holiday errand. Instead, her voice came through the speaker hushed, tight, and clipped with an urgency that immediately put my nerves on edge. She sounded as though she were hiding in a closet, speaking so quietly I could hear the fear more than the words. "Skylar, listen to me carefully," she began, skipping the customary greetings. "There has been a slight change of plans for the holiday dinner. We are going to need you and the children to stay home this year." The words hung in the air, cold and perfectly articulated. I did not gasp. I did not drop the phone. I merely sat back in my chair, tracing the smooth edge of my desk with one finger. Stay home. 3 days before Christmas. "Do not use that tone with me," my mother snapped, though her volume remained a strained whisper. "This is not about you. This is about your sister. Delaney is bringing Gideon Vale home for the holidays." Gideon Vale. The name was dropped with the heavy, calculated reverence of a priest invoking a deity. I knew of him, though not through my sister's breathless social media updates. He was a prominent figure in high-tier financial circles, a man whose wealth was measured not just in dollars, but in generational influence. "And Gideon's presence means my children and I are uninvited to a family dinner," I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of inflection. I knew that if I showed a fracture, she would wedge her justifications right into it. "You have to understand the optics, Skylar," my mother sighed, adopting the tone of a weary martyr explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. "Delaney is standing at the threshold of a life that could change everything for this family. A life-changing opportunity for all of us. Gideon comes from a world of immaculate standards. He is accustomed to a certain level of sophistication, a certain aesthetic." "An aesthetic," I repeated. "Yes. And frankly, darling, you bring a very heavy single mom vibe into the room. It is palpable. You are always distracted, always chasing after the kids. And the children, well, they are children. They have sticky hands. They make noise. They spill things. We are renting an exquisite property to host him, to show him that Delaney comes from a family of equal standing. We cannot afford the chaos of toddlers running around, staining the upholstery and ruining the image we are trying to project. We need everything to be flawless." I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to hear the echoes of her own words. I wanted the absolute, sterile cruelty of her reasoning to settle into the space between us. I did not curse. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would have validated her belief that I was too emotional, too messy, too much of a liability. "Gemus." "So," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling calm, "just so I am absolutely clear, you are banning your eldest daughter and your only grandchildren from Christmas dinner because my existence as a single mother does not fit the fictional wealthy narrative you are fabricating for a man my sister has been dating for a few months. You are afraid my children will smudge your fake rich performance." "Do not make it sound so ugly. Skylar, she hissed, her composure slipping just a fraction. "It is about supporting your sister. If this works out, it elevates the entire family. You should be happy for her. You should want to step aside and let her shine. We will drop off some gifts for the kids next week. Just tell them we had a plumbing emergency or something." She was not finished. The desperation in her voice spiked as she delivered the final command. "And Skylar, I need you to promise me something else. Do not text Delaney. Do not call her. Do not post any passive-aggressive quotes on the internet. I know how you get. I do not want you distracting her. She needs absolute focus for the next 48 hours. She cannot be stressed about your hurt feelings. Just let us have this one perfect night." "I understand completely, Mother," I said softly. "Good. I am glad you are finally being reasonable. Have a good Christmas, Skylar." The line went dead. The click of the disconnection felt like a heavy iron door slamming shut. I sat in the quiet of my office. Outside, the world was spinning in a frenzy of holiday cheer. Families were packing into cars. Children were writing letters. Parents were wrapping presents in an exhaustion fueled by pure love. Inside, the chill of my mother's rejection settled over me, a familiar, heavy blanket. It was the ultimate confirmation of what I had always known deep down. In the business of the Parker family, blood was only thicker than water when it could be monetized. To them, my children and I were not family. We were an inconvenient truth. We were a public relations risk. A younger version of me would have crumbled. A younger Skylar would have locked herself in the bathroom and wept until her eyes were swollen, wondering what she had done to be so easily discarded. She would have drafted a dozen angry text messages to Delaney and deleted every single one. She would have scrambled to explain to her innocent children why their grandparents did not want to see them on the most magical night of the year. But I was not that woman anymore. That woman died the day she realized no one was coming to rescue her, and she had to build her own empire from the ashes of their neglect. I placed the phone face down on the desk. Slowly, the tight knot in my chest began to loosen, replaced by something entirely different. It was not anger. Anger is hot and erratic. This was cold. This was crystalline and sharp. I turned my attention to the leather-bound planner sitting open next to my laptop. I traced my finger over the detailed itinerary I had finalized just that morning. There were entries for private chefs, bespoke gift deliveries, and a string quartet. Everything was perfectly arranged for a spectacular holiday weekend for two very important little people. A slow, quiet smile crept across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter watching a trap spring shut. My mother wanted a flawless image. She wanted a stage where she could play the wealthy matriarch, where my sister could play the high society heiress, and where my father and brother could masquerade as titans of industry. They wanted to impress Gideon Vale by pretending to belong to a world they knew absolutely nothing about. They demanded that I stay away so I would not ruin their carefully constructed illusion. I had no intention of ruining their dinner. I would not send a single text to my sister. I would not call my mother to beg or argue. I would grant them exactly what they asked for: total silence, total absence. Because what Marjorie Parker failed to realize in her frantic bid for social climbing was the supreme irony of her chosen stage. She thought she was renting a stranger's coastal estate. She thought she had found the perfect, untouchable backdrop for her desperate pantomime. I closed my planner. I would let them walk right into the venue. I would let them pour the expensive wine they could not afford. I would let them spin their web of lies right up until the moment it all snapped. They did not need me to destroy their image. I was just going to sit back and watch them dismantle their own lives, piece by piece, on the exact stage they believed they controlled. The Atlantic wind howling off the coast of Newport, Rhode Island, was bitter. But inside my home, the air was steeped in the scent of pine and roasting cinnamon. The estate, known locally as Harbor Lantern, spanned 12 acres of prime coastal real estate. I had acquired the property 3 years ago during a complex liquidation sale I personally oversaw. It featured a private screening room, an extensive library, and a security infrastructure that rivaled a federal building. Yet, despite its undeniable grandeur, I had deliberately designed it to feel like a home rather than a museum. There were no gilded gates or ostentatious displays of wealth here, just quiet, architectural brilliance wrapped in unyielding security. It was a fortress of peace, a sanctuary I had built entirely on my own, insulated from the noise and conditional love I had left behind. In the sunken living room, the reality of my life was playing out in a joyous, chaotic symphony. My 7-year-old son, Liam, was painstakingly constructing a lopsided gingerbread house, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he tried to balance a graham cracker roof. Beside him, my 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, was systematically eating the gumdrops meant for the decorations, her face a sticky, triumphant masterpiece of sugar. They were laughing together, a pure, unburdened sound that bounced off the vaulted oak ceilings. They knew absolutely nothing of the adult drama unfolding miles away. To them, this holiday was exactly what it should be: safe, warm, and entirely theirs. I leaned against the marble kitchen island, sipping black coffee as I watched them. My phone pressed securely to my ear. My executive assistant, Mara Keene, was running through the holiday logistics with her usual surgical precision. "The private car is confirmed for 3 o'clock this afternoon to pick up the string quartet from the airport," Mara said, her voice crisp and efficient over the line. "Chef Julian is preparing the 5-course tasting menu for 20 guests tomorrow evening. The bespoke gifts for Liam and Chloe are secured in the East Wing vault, and the extra security detail will rotate shifts every 8 hours starting tonight." "Thank you, Mara. Everything sounds perfect," I replied, keeping my tone light and conversational so the children would not sense any shift in my demeanor. "It is just another Tuesday for us," she joked dryly. Mara knew the intricate machinery required to run my life, because she was one of the few people who helped me manage it. What my family fundamentally failed to understand, or perhaps deliberately chose to ignore, was the reality of my career. Whenever Marjorie or my father, Stephen, bothered to ask what I did for a living, I offered vague, non-committal answers. They assumed I was a mid-level event planner, someone who arranged floral centerpieces and organized catering logistics for local corporate retreats. I never corrected them. Their validation had ceased to be a currency I cared to earn over a decade ago. The truth was an entirely different universe. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Blackshore Recovery Group. We did not plan parties. We were a highly specialized firm dealing in aggressive asset restructuring, elite crisis management, and rigorous risk assessment. When billion-dollar conglomerates faced catastrophic financial hemorrhage, or when generational wealth trusts were on the verge of imploding due to gross mismanagement, they called my firm to surgically salvage the wreckage. I dealt in leverage, corporate compliance, and unearthing buried financial truths. I was the woman the ultra-wealthy feared and relied upon when the ink on their private ledgers turned red. Watching Chloe successfully steal another gumdrop, a brief, sharp memory surfaced. It was 12 years ago. I had drafted a meticulous business plan for Blackshore, needing a modest cosigner for a commercial lease, a mere $50,000 guarantee. I had sat in my parents' living room, presenting the data and the market research. My father had barely glanced at the folder before handing it back, citing a tight market and the risky nature of a young woman trying to enter corporate recovery. Less than a month later, they gifted my sister, Delaney, 3 times that amount to launch a luxury lifestyle brand that completely failed within 6 months. The year after that, they poured nearly $250,000 into my brother Logan's phantom tech startup. I had walked out of their house that day, driven straight to the bank, and leveraged every single thing I owned to start Blackshore on my own. It was, in hindsight, the most profitable refusal I had ever received. I blinked the memory away, refusing to let it sour the morning. I had long ago established a hard, non-negotiable rule in my household. My children would never inherit my generational trauma. I would not poison their minds with tales of their grandparents' neglect or their aunt's profound narcissism. Liam and Chloe did not need to know that their blood relatives considered them messy liabilities. They only needed to know that their mother was an immovable wall standing between them and anything that could diminish their light. The toxicity of the Parker family ended with me. It would not be allowed to touch my children. Mara's voice pulled my focus back to the present. Before I let you go, Skylar, there is one final update. The compliance team just finalized the background portfolio you requested. The guest list file for the Vale family has been updated and securely routed to your personal server. Excellent, I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. Did the restructuring timeline for Vale and Wren Capital shift at all? Not a single day. Everything is locked in for the first quarter of next year. Mara confirmed. They are highly anticipating the introductory meeting with you. Have a wonderful holiday, boss. You too, Mara. Take care. I ended the call and slipped the phone into the pocket of my cashmere cardigan. The irony of the situation was almost too poetic to bear. My family was currently frantic, trying to orchestrate a fraudulent display of wealth to impress Gideon Vale, completely unaware that Gideon's family trust was the exact entity my firm was currently vetting for a massive portfolio acquisition. My mother was trying to claw her way into a room where I already owned the table. I walked over to the children, gently wiping a smudge of white frosting from Chloe's nose and praising Liam's structurally dubious gingerbread architecture. They giggled, completely enveloped in the magic of the season. I kissed the tops of their heads, feeling a profound surge of protective clarity. This Christmas was going to be distinctly different. It was not going to be marked by passive-aggressive jabs over a dry turkey, or by me swallowing my pride to maintain a false, uncomfortable peace. I was going to give my family exactly what they had engineered. I was going to let them step onto the grand stage they so desperately desired. But I would not fight them with shouting matches or tearful accusations. Emotional outbursts were the currency of the powerless, and I was far from powerless. I dealt in facts. I dealt in documented truths, legally binding contracts, and the undeniable crushing weight of reality. I was going to turn this holiday into the night I permanently closed the door on an exhausting, decades-long cycle of disrespect. I would let them construct their elaborate house of cards right here in my own home, and when the timing was absolutely perfect, I would pull the foundational slip of paper. They were about to learn that the woman they dismissed as a chaotic background character was, in fact, the architect of their final reckoning. While my children were decorating gingerbread in the safety of our kitchen, a spectacularly different scene was unfolding 40 miles south. I would later piece together the exact details of their morning from security footage and the eventual, reluctant confessions of those present. The Parker family caravan was rolling toward Newport in a rented, oversized luxury sport utility vehicle. My father, Stephen, was behind the wheel, his knuckles white with an anxiety he was trying desperately to mask as concentration. Beside him sat Marjorie, her posture rigid, rehearsing polite, aristocratic laughter under her breath. In the back, my sister Delaney was frantically refreshing her social media feeds, already drafting the captions for the lavish lifestyle she was about to pretend she owned. Next to Delaney sat my older brother, Logan, and his girlfriend of 6 months, Tessa Rowan. Tessa was a sharp, pragmatic corporate attorney who spent her days dismantling fragile corporate structures. She was a woman who dealt exclusively in hard evidence, and for the past 2 hours, she had been sitting in silence, quietly observing the glaring cracks in the Parker family facade. The master plan was painfully ambitious and entirely hollow. They had pooled the absolute last of their accessible credit to lease a sprawling, historic waterfront estate for 3 days. The objective was simple. They would arrive early, unpack, hide their cheap luggage, and arrange the space to seamlessly pass it off as the ancestral Parker summer home. It was designed to be the ultimate stage for Gideon to step onto, a carefully curated illusion meant to secure a proposal and, by extension, secure my family's financial salvation. The sport utility vehicle pulled into the winding driveway of the rental property at precisely 11 o'clock in the morning. The house was beautiful, a grand shingled manor with sweeping views of the harbor. My father parked the car with a heavy sigh of relief. unbuckling his seatbelt with the triumphant air of a man who had successfully smuggled contraband across a border. He walked up to the heavy oak front door and punched a 5-digit code into the electronic lock. A sharp, angry red light flashed. A low beep signaled an error. Stephen frowned, muttering about sticky keypads. He typed the numbers again, pressing harder this time. The red light flashed a second time. He tried a third time. The lock remained entirely dead. Marjorie stepped out of the vehicle, the brisk ocean wind immediately threatening her perfectly styled hair. She pulled her wool coat tighter, her voice strained but attempting to maintain a thin veneer of upper-class composure. "Stephen, darling, please tell me you did not forget the entry code. The wind is absolutely dreadful out here." "I have the exact code right here," Stephen snapped, tapping his phone screen aggressively. He dialed the property management company, putting the call on speakerphone so the entire driveway could hear. A bored customer service representative answered after 4 agonizing rings. "Elite Coastal Properties. How can I help you?" "Yes, this is Stephen Parker," my father announced, inflating his chest. "I am standing outside the cliffside property on Ocean Avenue, and your electronic lock is malfunctioning. I expect someone here to override it immediately." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the rapid clacking of a keyboard. "Mr. Parker, let me check your file." I see the issue here. That reservation was officially voided at 8 o'clock this morning." A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the driveway. Only the sound of the crashing waves filled the space. "Voided?" my father echoed, his voice cracking slightly. "That is utterly impossible. We have an ironclad confirmation email." "You had a preliminary hold, sir," the representative corrected, her tone completely devoid of sympathy. "But our billing department attempted to process the final security deposit and the remaining balance 4 separate times overnight. Every single transaction was declined by your banking institution due to insufficient funds. When the final grace period expired this morning, the system automatically canceled the booking." "This is a mistake," Marjorie gasped, abandoning her aristocratic tone. "Try the secondary platinum card. Try the corporate account." "Ma'am, we tried 3 different cards on file. They all returned the exact same error code. The property is no longer yours to access. Have a pleasant holiday." The line went dead. Delaney let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. She threw open the car door and stormed onto the gravel. "What do you mean, declined? Gideon is going to be here in less than 24 hours. Where are we supposed to put him? We cannot host him in a standard hotel room. He will know we are frauds." "Calm down, Delaney," Logan shouted, stepping out to join the panic. "It is obviously a banking error. A fraud prevention algorithm must have flagged the large transaction. You know how these wealth management banks are over the holidays. They freeze everything at the slightest anomaly." "It is not a fraud alert," Stephen hissed, rubbing his temples furiously. "The funds were supposed to transfer from the secondary trust yesterday." It was a lie. There was no secondary trust. There had not been a trust in over a decade. They were entirely out of money, dancing on the absolute edge of bankruptcy, but not a single one of them possessed the courage to say the words out loud. From the back seat, Tessa watched the meltdown with a cold, analytical eye. She had spent the last 6 months listening to Logan boast about his expansive investment portfolios and his family's generational assets. Yet, sitting in this freezing driveway, she noticed the undeniable physical tells of financial ruin. Truly wealthy people did not panic over a locked door. They did not scream at customer service representatives or blame phantom wire transfers. If a billionaire experienced a declined card, they made one phone call to a private banker and the issue was resolved in 3 minutes. The desperate, sweaty panic radiating from the Parker family was the unmistakable scent of people who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "We need a solution right now," Marjorie demanded, her hands shaking. "We cannot go back home. We have to find another property. Every luxury rental in Newport has been booked for 6 months, Logan said, aggressively scrolling through his phone. "There is 0 inventory. None." He opened a family tracking application on his phone. A digital tether we had all installed years ago for a family vacation and which my parents used constantly to monitor my whereabouts. I had never bothered to turn it off, primarily because I did not care if they knew where I was. Logan's eyes widened. Wait. Look at this. Skylar is here. What do you mean she's here? Marjorie asked, leaning over his shoulder. Her location dot is active. She is roughly 12 miles away, right on the coast, Logan explained, a sudden, desperate energy returning to his voice. She must be working. You know she does all those high-end event logistics. She is probably house-sitting or setting up a massive holiday gala for one of her rich clients. A dangerous, opportunistic silence fell over my family. I could practically see the gears turning in my mother's head, watching her twist a complete disaster into a twisted stroke of luck. We go to Skylar, Marjorie announced, her voice hardening with resolve. If she is managing a large estate, she has access to it. We will just explain the situation to the homeowner. We are respectable people. Or, better yet, we just move in, keep Skylar out of sight in the staff quarters, and pretend the house is ours for the night. She would not dare turn us away on Christmas Eve. She owes us that much. Tessa narrowed her eyes, deeply unsettled by the casual, breathtaking entitlement with which they planned to hijack my life, but she stayed silent. She wanted to see exactly how this was going to play out. 30 minutes later, the rented vehicle navigated the winding, picturesque coastal roads of Newport, following the blinking blue dot on Logan's phone. The conversation in the car had shifted from panic to a forced, manic optimism. They convinced themselves that this was a minor hurdle, a funny anecdote they would laugh about later. Then, the navigation system announced they had arrived. Stephen brought the heavy vehicle to a slow, creeping halt. The idle chatter in the car died instantly, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. They were not parked outside a catering hall. They were not looking at a modest staff entrance. The vehicle idled in front of a pair of massive, custom-forged, wrought-iron gates. Beyond the imposing metalwork sat a sprawling, pristine white stone mansion that commanded the cliffside, its massive windows reflecting the gray winter ocean. The grounds were immaculate, adorned with subtle, breathtakingly elegant holiday lighting that whispered of immense, quiet wealth. A uniformed security guard stood inside a heated glass booth, watching their vehicle with professional detachment. Mounted on the stone pillar beside the gate was a heavy bronze plaque. The family stared at it, completely unable to comprehend the words engraved in the metal. It read, Harbor Lantern Trust, Private Residence. From my vantage point on the second-floor landing, I watched the live feed as my father argued with the intercom, slapping the steering wheel in frustration. I did not make them wait long. With a simple tap on the glass screen, I authorized the license plate. The massive gate swung open in complete, well-oiled silence. Down in the driveway, I could almost hear their collective sigh of relief. They drove through the entrance, genuinely believing they had caught a lucky break. Perhaps they assumed the gate was malfunctioning, or that a security guard had simply waved them through out of holiday laziness. They were walking blindly into the very center of the maze, guided entirely by their own unyielding entitlement. By the time they hauled their luggage up the front steps, I was already waiting in the main foyer. I wore a simple ivory cashmere lounge set, holding a steaming mug of hot cocoa. The environment around me was perfectly calibrated to project serene, untouchable wealth. Soft instrumental jazz floated from invisible, architecturally integrated speakers. The ambient temperature was a precise 72 degrees. The air smelled of expensive cedar and faint ocean salt. The heavy mahogany doors burst open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and the frantic, chaotic energy of the Parker family. They spilled into the entryway, their cheap plastic luggage wheels clattering violently against the imported stone floors. They were immediately dwarfed by the triple-height ceiling and the sweeping dual staircase, but the sheer majesty of the space did not humble them. It only activated their greed. There was absolutely no hesitation. There was no sheepish realization that they had just banished me from their lives less than 72 hours ago. My mother stepped forward, her eyes darting around the magnificent space like a ravenous bird before finally settling on me. She did not look apologetic. She looked relieved, and then instantly authoritative. "Skylar, thank goodness you are here," Marjorie announced, dropping her designer handbag onto a priceless 18th century console table. "We had an absolute disaster with our rental agency. A total systemic failure on their end. Completely unacceptable. Anyway, we will need to stay here for one night. Maybe two. You need to arrange 4 bedrooms for us immediately. And make sure the staff brings up our bags before they start preparing for tomorrow." She spoke to me as if I were a slightly incompetent concierge. Before I could even formulate a response to her breathtaking audacity, Delaney pushed past her. My sister did not even look at my face. She was already pacing the length of the grand hall, her eyes scanning the custom lighting fixtures and the sweeping ocean views framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Oh, this is actually perfect," Delaney breathed, pulling out her phone to take a video of the sweeping staircase. She spun around, her coat flaring. "This is so much better than the rental. Gideon will be absolutely obsessed with this architecture." "Skylar, whose house is this? Are the owners out of town? Just make sure all the catering equipment is hidden before he arrives tomorrow evening. I want this to look lived in. I want it to look like it has been ours for generations." My brother Logan puffed out his chest, attempting to look relaxed in a space that clearly intimidated him. "Not bad, sis. You really scored a decent gig this time. I will take the master suite with the ocean view. Toss me the keys." While my family buzzed around with the parasitic energy of locusts finding a fresh, unharvested crop, Tessa Rowan remained perfectly still near the doorway. She was not looking at the panoramic view or the sweeping staircase. Her sharp, analytical eyes were meticulously scanning the perimeter. She noticed the discrete biometric scanners mounted next to the staff entrances. She noticed the museum-grade climate control sensors integrated into the crown molding above the original oil paintings. Then, her gaze fell upon a small, heavily understated bronze plate near the private elevator. It bore the crest of a notoriously exclusive wealth management firm, indicating the property was held in a private, irrevocable trust. Tessa was a formidable corporate lawyer. She knew instantly that this was not a party venue. This was not a secondary vacation home that a freelance event planner had the authority to commandeer for a desperate family sleepover. Her eyes snapped to me, wide with a sudden, chilling realization. She recognized the quiet, absolute power in the way I stood in the center of the room. I took a slow sip of my cocoa, letting the warm chocolate coat my throat. I looked directly at my mother, letting the silence stretch until it became slightly uncomfortable. "You want to stay here? Tonight? Do not make this difficult, Skylar," Marjorie warned, her voice dropping into that familiar, condescending register she reserved for dealing with unruly children. "We are in a terrible bind. We are family. You can just tell your boss that we are part of the security detail or the extended catering staff if they happen to call and ask. I am sure you can manage that. You always manage to spin things to keep your little jobs." I set my mug down on a silver tray. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an apology for the phone call she made 3 days ago. I simply laid down the steel tracks of their own demise. "You may stay," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any familial warmth. "But there are strict conditions. The East Wing is absolutely off limits. You are not to go near it. You will not interact with my children under any circumstances. And you will not attempt to alter the schedule of the house staff by a single minute. The dinner arrangements remain exactly as I have planned them. If you can abide by those rules, you can sleep in the guest quarters in the West Wing." Marjorie smiled, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk blooming across her face. In her mind, she had won. She firmly believed I was terrified of causing a scene that might jeopardize my employment. She thought my conditions were merely the desperate boundaries of a lowly estate manager trying to protect her paycheck. "Of course, darling. We will be perfectly invisible," Marjorie purred, already turning her back to me. "Logan, grab the heavier bags. Delaney, come help me pick the best suites." They surged past me like a tidal wave, their loud voices echoing up the marble staircase as they immediately began to argue over who would claim the largest bathroom. Soon, the vast foyer was empty, save for Tessa. She had not moved a single inch to follow them. She waited in absolute silence until the sound of their footsteps faded down the western corridor. Slowly, she closed the distance between us, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She stopped just an arm's length away. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath, sharp and completely stripped of any polite pretense. "They think you are the help," Tessa whispered, her dark eyes locked onto mine, searching for confirmation. "They think they are going to play rich in someone else's house to trick a billionaire into marrying into their family. But I saw the security protocols on the doors. I saw the trust plaque by the elevator." She paused, swallowing hard, her professional composure cracking just enough to reveal the immense gravity of the situation. "I know they are lying about everything to Gideon Vale, and I know you do not work here. So tell me, Skylar, what exactly are you setting up for them?" I motioned for Tessa to follow me. We left the echoing grandeur of the main foyer, stepping through a set of heavy soundproof doors into the private sanctuary of my study. The atmosphere shifted instantly and violently. Outside in the hall was a circus of unearned entitlement and frantic, cheap energy. Inside was a fortress of absolute, calculated control. The room was wrapped in dark walnut paneling and smelled faintly of old paper, leather, and expensive cedar. Across the massive mahogany desk lay open dossiers, complex asset maps, and highly classified restructuring blueprints. It was the nerve center of a quiet, formidable empire. I walked over to the stone fireplace, adjusting the gas logs until a steady, warm, amber glow filled the space, a stark contrast to the cold desperation my family had just dragged into my home. Tessa took a seat in one of the leather wingback chairs. She did not relax. Her posture remained impeccably straight, her sharp eyes darting across the room, her mind clearly racing to process the massive shift in power dynamics. She looked at the towering bookshelves lined with dense legal precedents, corporate tax codes, and global financial regulations. "I have been dating your brother for 6 months, Tessa began, her voice steady but laced with a profound, simmering irritation. "I am a corporate attorney. I spend 60 hours a week analyzing shell companies, piercing corporate veils, and dismantling fraudulent mergers. I knew almost immediately that Logan was inflating his portfolio. He uses financial buzzwords incorrectly. He talks endlessly about capital gains, but avoids any technical discussion about tax burdens or liquidity. I suspected the entire family was running on fumes, projecting an image they could not afford, but I never had concrete proof. Until I watched your father nearly have a stroke over a declined credit card in a freezing driveway. I leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing my arms over my chest. "You want the concrete proof? I can give it to you in 3 sentences. I did not need to open a file or check a ledger. I knew the tragic, pathetic numbers by heart. My parents took out a second mortgage on their suburban house 5 years ago to fund Delaney and her so-called luxury lifestyle brand, which is currently operating at a net loss of $80,000 a year. 2 years ago, they took out a third mortgage to seed Logan and his tech incubator, a phantom company that possesses 0 proprietary software, no patents, and no actual clients. They are leveraged to the absolute breaking point. There are no generational trusts. There are no offshore accounts. There is only a crushing, insurmountable mountain of debt, and they are terrified of the impending collapse." Tessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting out a slow, heavy breath. The confirmation of her suspicions seemed to exhaust her, validating the unease she had carried for months. "So this entire weekend is a desperate, theatrical production to convince Gideon Vale that Delaney is a wealthy heiress. They think if they can secure a marriage proposal, they secure a permanent financial bailout." "It is infinitely worse than that," I said, my tone dropping into a dangerously cold register. "They do not understand who they are dealing with. They see Gideon as a handsome man with a blank checkbook. He is not. He is the principal coordinator for Vale and Wren Capital. He is a razor-sharp financial operator who manages billions of dollars in institutional wealth. I walked behind my desk and tapped a thick, sealed manila folder resting near my keyboard. My firm, Blackshore Recovery Group, was retained 3 months ago by the Vale Family Trust. We are currently executing a massive, highly confidential forensic audit and asset restructuring for a failing portfolio they are preparing to acquire. Gideon and I are scheduled to have our first official, face-to-face strategic alignment meeting right after the holidays. Tessa stared at me, her sharp features freezing in absolute shock. The pieces clicked together in her brilliant legal mind with terrifying speed. She stood up, her eyes wide as she looked from the folder back to my face. "Wait," Tessa breathed, her voice trembling slightly with realization. "This morning, on the senior partner conference call at my firm, there was massive chatter about a mysterious executive being brought in to clean up the Vale ecosystem. The industry rumors said the Vales had hired an absolute shark to aggressively dismantle the legacy board of directors. Everyone kept referring to a CEO named S. Parker, a phantom fixer who never gives press interviews." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "That is you. You are the Parker they are all terrified of." "I am," I confirmed quietly. Tessa began pacing the length of the Persian rug. The gravity of the situation had just escalated from a pathetic domestic farce into a massive, highly volatile corporate collision. "Skylar, if your family runs this con on Gideon, it ceases to be a sad family drama. It becomes a massive professional liability. They are going to attempt to defraud the primary principal of a fund your company is actively restructuring. If Gideon feels he was manipulated by the Parker family, it could completely pollute the waters of a multi-million-dollar business relationship. Why did you let them through the gates? Why not just throw them out into the cold and tell Gideon the truth over a phone call right now?" "Because screaming matches in the driveway accomplish absolutely nothing," I replied, my voice steady, anchored by years of managing high-stakes crises. "If I kick them out now, they will spin a narrative of victimhood. They will run to Gideon and tell him that I am a jealous, estranged, mentally unstable sister who sabotaged their holiday out of pure spite. They will find another way to lie. They have spent my entire life controlling the narrative, painting me as the difficult, chaotic daughter. I will not give them the ammunition to do it again." I moved toward her, my eyes locking onto hers with unyielding intensity. "I am not going to throw them out. I am going to let them build their own gallows. I want them to sit at my dining table. I want them to serve their lies on silver platters directly to Gideon. I want them to construct a script so elaborate and so thoroughly documented that when the illusion finally shatters, they cannot blame anyone but themselves. Every single flip of the board, every collapsed lie, must be generated by their own undeniable spoken truths." Tessa stopped pacing. A slow, incredibly dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator who had just been invited to a hunt. She understood the assignment perfectly. She was no longer a confused girlfriend trailing behind a lying boyfriend. She was a litigator preparing for the trial of a lifetime. "They are going to try to dominate the conversation tomorrow night," Tessa said, her mind already organizing the tactical approach. "Logan will boast about phantom yields. Delaney will drop fake architectural knowledge to impress Gideon. Your mother will try to diminish you at every turn to elevate their own status." "Exactly," I said, "which is why I need a proxy. As the host, I must remain impeccably polite and emotionally detached. But you are a guest. You have the absolute freedom to be curious. I will be intensely, relentlessly curious," Tessa promised, her eyes gleaming with cold anticipation. "I will ask the most innocent, devastating questions imaginable. I will ask Delaney about her corporate tax structures and her supply chain logistics. I will ask Logan for the specific regulatory filings of his tech incubator. I will peel back their fake wealth, their fake careers, and their fake achievements, layer by agonizing layer, right in front of Gideon Vale." I extended my hand toward her. The warmth of the fire cast long, dramatic shadows across the walls of the study, but the clarity between us was blindingly bright. This was no longer just about petty family resentment or unhealed childhood wounds. It was a strategic alliance formed to execute a perfect, legally sound, and utterly public dismantling of a decades-long fraud. Tessa met my gaze with unwavering resolve and gripped my hand firmly. We shook on it, two women who had looked at the exact same illusion and decided, silently and simultaneously, to burn it straight to the ground. The chessboard was set. The pieces were moving into position. Tomorrow night, there would be no screaming, no tears, and no impulsive revenge. There would only be a controlled demolition from which the Parker family would never, ever recover. Christmas morning arrived, stripping away the dark shadows of the estate and replacing them with a blinding, harsh winter light reflecting off the Atlantic Ocean. Inside the guest quarters of the West Wing, however, the spirit of the holiday was completely absent. It had been replaced by the suffocating, manic energy of a high-stakes dress rehearsal. Walking past the cracked doors of their respective suites, I witnessed a masterclass in pathetic fabrication. My father, Stephen, was pacing the length of a Persian rug, holding a crystal tumbler filled with tap water, loudly practicing his thoughts on diversified offshore portfolios and quarterly yields to his own reflection in the mirror. Down the hall, Marjorie was conducting vocal exercises, deliberately lowering her register to achieve the lazy, unbothered drawl she associated with old money matriarchs. Delaney had practically emptied her cheap luggage onto the floor. Surrounded by piles of beige and cream garments, desperately trying to construct an ensemble that screamed quiet luxury but ultimately just looked like a catalog display. They were all frantically applying their masks, terrified that a single slipped line would cost them their millionaire savior. I, on the other hand, required no costume. I wore a tailored, dark emerald wool skirt and a simple black turtleneck. I was not there to play a role. I was there to manage the stage. Logan decided that his contribution to the grand illusion would be asserting dominance over the household operations. I found him in the main culinary prep kitchen, snapping his fingers at Chef Julian and the catering staff. He was wearing an absurdly bright cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders, trying to dictate exactly how the evening service should flow. He loudly demanded that the vintage wine be decanted exactly 2 hours before the first course, speaking to the seasoned, Michelin-trained professionals as if they were incompetent teenagers at a fast food drive-thru. The staff exchanged brief, icy glances of profound annoyance, but maintained their flawless professional composure. I stepped into the kitchen. I did not rush in with a clipboard, nor did I apologize profusely to Logan like a terrified event planner trying to placate a wealthy homeowner. I simply walked over to Chef Julian, placed a hand lightly on the marble counter, and nodded. Julian immediately turned his back on my brother and handed me the final tasting menu for my approval. Logan faltered, his authoritative posture dissolving. My family could not comprehend my behavior. They expected me to be scurrying through the halls, carrying trays or adjusting floral arrangements in a panicked sweat. Instead, I moved through the estate with the quiet, unquestionable gravity of an understated host. I gave gentle directives, and the staff moved with military precision around me. My family could not define my status, so they chose to ignore it, attributing my control to an overly generous boss who had left me in charge of the keys. While they obsessed over crystal stemware and seating arrangements, my only genuine priority was securing the perimeter around my children. I had established a strict, impenetrable safe zone on the second floor of the East Wing. The private screening room was currently playing a marathon of animated holiday movies. The adjacent lounge had been transformed into an elaborate gingerbread construction site. My trusted nanny, Mrs. Gable, was supervising, and in less than an hour, my best friend Sarah would be arriving with her husband and their 3 children to join the festivities. Liam and Chloe were going to spend their Christmas wrapped in a bubble of pure, chaotic joy, completely insulated from the toxic crossfire about to detonate downstairs. As I walked out of the East Wing corridor to check the floral installations, Delaney emerged from the main staircase. She paused, her perfectly contoured face twisting in severe irritation as a loud, bright chorus of children laughing echoed briefly down the hall. "Skylar, you have got to do something about that noise," Delaney complained, crossing her arms. "The acoustics in this place carry everything. That chaotic, sticky toddler energy is going to completely kill the mood. Gideon expects an elegant, sophisticated adult evening. You need to keep them quiet or move them to a basement. I stopped walking. I did not sigh. I did not engage in a debate about family values or holiday spirit. I looked at her with a gaze so entirely devoid of warmth that she involuntarily took a half step backward. "The children stay exactly where they are," I stated, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous calm. "Their laughter stays. This is their Christmas. If you find their joy distracting, you are more than welcome to pack your bags and host your elegant dinner in the freezing driveway. Do we understand each other?" Delaney opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer, unyielding brick wall of my boundary silenced her. She scoffed, spun on her heel, and marched back toward the dining room. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a secure message from Mara Keene. I stepped into the alcove beneath the stairs to read it. The guest list had indeed been updated, but the new addition was a massive acceleration of the timeline. Gideon Vale was not arriving alone. He was bringing his aunt, Evelyn Vale. My pulse steadied into a slow, rhythmic drumbeat. Evelyn was not just a wealthy relative. She was the formidable matriarch who held a controlling voting bloc within the Vale and Wren Capital Fund. She was the very woman whose signature was required on the restructuring contracts my firm was finalizing. The level of risk my family was blindly stepping into had just skyrocketed from a localized embarrassment to a potential corporate catastrophe. Simultaneously, in the quiet solitude of the mahogany library, Tessa was executing her end of our silent alliance. Having excused herself from Marjorie's frantic table-setting critique, Tessa sat with her tablet, utilizing her firm's proprietary legal database to run a deep, forensic background check on the Parker family's public financial filings. She bypassed the standard credit reports and dug straight into the county clerk records regarding the mortgages on my parents' suburban home. She found the first lien. She found the second. She found the desperate third. But it was the most recent filing that made her stop breathing. 3 weeks ago, the aggregated debt had been bundled and sold by a secondary collection agency to a private holding corporation. Tessa meticulously traced the registration of that holding corporation. It routed through 2 shell entities and ended somewhere that made Tessa go still. She closed the tablet and stared at the fire, realizing only that I knew far more about my family's debt than I had ever admitted. By mid-afternoon, the grand dining room was fully staged. The Parker family stood in the doorway, staring hungrily at the silver candelabras, the personalized embossed menus, and the sheer, breathtaking opulence of the space I had prepared for my actual strategic partners. The sight of such proximity to immense power acted like a narcotic on their greed. I listened from the shadows of the adjacent hallway as Marjorie and Stephen began urgently whispering to Delaney. They decided that merely surviving the dinner was no longer sufficient. Seeing the magnificent stage, they convinced themselves that tonight was the ultimate opportunity. They would not just save face, they would aggressively corner Gideon into a public commitment. They were going to force an engagement before dessert was served. I retreated upstairs to the absolute quiet of my private study. I sat behind my desk and activated the internal security monitors. On the glowing screen, I watched the camera feed from the East Wing. Liam was excitedly showing Sarah's son his new toy train, while Chloe was fast asleep on a plush beanbag chair, clutching a stuffed reindeer. I rested my hand against the cold, smooth wood of the desk. My family was downstairs, gleefully polishing the very blades that would soon cut them down. But watching the peaceful, rhythmic breathing of my daughter on the monitor, I anchored myself to the absolute truth of the evening. Tonight was never about petty revenge. It was about drawing an irreversible boundary and protecting my children from being dragged into this mess again. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open to welcome Gideon Vale and his aunt, Evelyn. Gideon stepped into the grand foyer with the effortless grace of a man who had been navigating rooms of immense power his entire life. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and carried an aura of sharp, quiet intelligence. His eyes immediately took in the architectural lines of the vaulted ceiling, the ambient lighting, and the flawless, silent orchestration of my staff stepping forward to take their winter coats. He looked genuinely impressed by the understated, immaculate standard of the estate. Almost instantly, my mother and father descended upon him like starving animals spotting a feast. Marjorie extended her hand, her voice dripping with a practiced, old money fatigue that made my skin crawl. "Welcome to our little coastal retreat, Gideon. It has been in the family portfolio for years. We usually rotate between here and a few other properties down south, but the ocean air in winter is simply irresistible." Stephen nodded sagely beside her, adjusting his cuffs with an air of profound importance. Delaney materialized beside Gideon, slipping her arm through his with a desperate, clinging possessiveness. She immediately began weaving her own thread into their tapestry of lies. "I was just telling Mother how much I needed this break." She sighed dramatically, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Scaling my fashion label this past quarter has been entirely exhausting, and my private investment community has been demanding so much of my personal bandwidth. A weekend here is exactly what I needed to recharge before the fiscal year begins." Gideon smiled politely, but his eyes remained highly analytical, sweeping the room and registering the frantic energy radiating from her. I entered the room carrying a silver tray of perfectly chilled champagne flutes. I did not wear an apron, nor did I hover nervously like a hired servant. I simply stood at the edge of the conversational circle, offering the glasses with quiet authority. "Good evening. Welcome to Harbor Lantern," I said, my tone perfectly leveled. Before Gideon could fully turn his attention to me, Marjorie stepped sharply between us, her shoulder aggressively angling me out of his line of sight. "Oh, Gideon, Evelyn, this is my eldest daughter, Skylar. She is very helpful with the logistics. We let her handle the background details and the staff coordination so the rest of us can actually enjoy the holiday." My father chuckled nervously, adding a patronizing wave of his hand. "Yes, she loves playing event coordinator. Keeps her busy," I merely smiled, handing Evelyn a glass, offering absolutely no correction to their insulting narrative. We moved into the grand dining room, taking our seats beneath the cascading crystal chandelier. The first course, a delicate sea scallop carpaccio, was served in total, orchestrated silence. Then, Tessa Rowan leaned forward, her wine glass held delicately by the slender stem. This was her opening move. "Delaney," Tessa began, her voice the picture of friendly, professional curiosity. "Logan mentioned your brand has seen rapid expansion lately. I am dealing with a corporate client in a similar growth phase right now. Which logistics agency are you using to manage your international supply chain? And how are you structuring the corporate tax burden across different state lines to maximize your margins?" The color drained entirely from Delaney's face, leaving her pale and wide-eyed. She stammered, her gaze darting to Logan for rescue, then down to her silver fork. "Oh, well, my internal team handles those micro details. We use a boutique firm. The tax structure is very fluid right now, very modern and agile." Tessa took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes locked onto my sister. "Fluid? How fascinating. In my experience as a corporate attorney, the Internal Revenue Service rarely appreciates fluidity." Desperate to pull the spotlight away from his floundering daughter, Stephen cleared his throat loudly and gestured toward the massive landscape painting dominating the far wall of the dining room. "I acquired that piece at a private auction in London," he boasted, his voice booming slightly too loud for the intimate setting. "Late 19th century. I personally oversaw the restoration process. They used a modern acrylic resin to preserve the original oil pigments. It is a brilliant cutting-edge technique." Gideon paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at the painting, then back at my father, his polite smile freezing into a mask of pure aristocratic confusion. "A modern acrylic resin on a 19th century oil canvas?" Gideon asked softly, his tone completely even but laced with undeniable authority. "That would permanently destroy the natural aging process of the oil paint. It is universally forbidden by any reputable art conservator in the world." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Stephen turned a patchy shade of red, tugging at his collar and mumbling something incoherent about experimental European methods and a misunderstanding with the art broker. Evelyn Vale had not spoken much since arriving. She was an imposing figure in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She was a woman who read balance sheets for breakfast and destroyed weak executives by lunch. She watched Stephen sweat. She watched Delaney tremble. And then, her piercing, intelligent gaze slid directly down the length of the long mahogany table to me. I was cutting my fish with measured, unbothered precision. Evelyn noted the stark contrast. She saw the way the waitstaff anticipated my every micro-movement without needing a single spoken command. She saw the absolute, grounded stillness in my posture while my family vibrated with frantic, desperate energy. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her attention permanently shifting away from the chaotic Parkers and locking onto me with deep, calculating interest. To ease the painful tension hanging over the table, Gideon turned the conversation to his own affairs. "The new year is going to be incredibly demanding for our firm," he admitted, swirling the dark red wine in his crystal glass. "We are bringing in an external restructuring firm to overhaul a major legacy portfolio. It is highly confidential, but we are essentially handing the keys over to a phantom executive, an apex predator in the financial sector, according to our board of directors. We are having our initial strategy alignment meeting right after the holidays. I am quite eager to see if this chief executive officer lives up to the terrifying reputation." I stopped chewing. The words apex predator and strategy alignment meeting were the exact, verbatim phrases utilized in the confidential executive summary I had authored and locked in my study upstairs. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, making direct eye contact with Tessa across the table. Her lips curved into the faintest, sharpest smile imaginable. The first two courses concluded, and the atmosphere in the room had shifted on a fundamental, atomic level. To an untrained eye, it was simply a polite, upscale holiday dinner filled with soft jazz and expensive silver. But beneath the polished surface, the room had violently fractured into two distinct factions. On one side sat my mother, father, brother, and sister, sweating profusely under the crushing weight of their own collapsing fictions, desperately shoveling coal into an engine that was rapidly losing steam. On the other side sat Gideon, Evelyn, Tessa, and myself. We were no longer participants in their pathetic play. We were the silent, knowing audience watching a spectacular slow-motion train wreck, simply waiting for the final, inevitable collision. The roasted duck with cherry reduction was served, but the appetite at the table had distinctly evaporated for half the guests. Delaney was vibrating with a poorly concealed panic. Gideon, the man she had painstakingly attempted to mesmerize with her fabricated socialite persona, was barely glancing at her. Instead, his sharp, intelligent eyes kept drifting to my end of the long mahogany table. He had recognized the structural integrity of the estate, and being a man who dealt in massive assets, his curiosity was piqued. "Skylar," Gideon said, cutting smoothly through Delaney's rambling anecdote about a fictional yacht trip, "I am genuinely fascinated by the coastal erosion mitigation on this property. Managing a cliffside estate of this magnitude requires aggressive topographical planning and rigorous risk management. Who handles your environmental compliance?" Delaney's jaw tightened. My mother, Marjorie, immediately leaned forward, her forced smile looking more like a grimace. She could not stand the sight of Gideon treating me as an intellectual equal. "Oh, Gideon, you do not need to bore yourself with those tedious details," Marjorie interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Skylar is just very good at scrambling behind the scenes. She handles the grunt work. She has always had to be overly practical, because of her unfortunate personal decisions. When you are struggling to keep your head above water, you learn to manage the little things." The insult was designed to humiliate me, to subtly remind the table that I was an unwed mother and, in her eyes, a financial burden. A younger me would have flushed red and stared at my plate. Tonight, I simply dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin and met Gideon's gaze. "To answer your question, Gideon," I said, my voice projecting a calm, effortless authority that completely steamrolled my mother's petty jab. The environmental compliance is managed through a multi-tiered trust structure. We reinforced the bedrock 2 years ago using a specialized marine engineering firm, securing a 99-year zoning variance from the state. It mitigates liability by shifting the depreciation risk off the primary ledger. Gideon nodded slowly, a look of profound respect settling over his features. Beside him, Marjorie looked as though she had been slapped. By refusing to engage with her insult and responding with flawless, high-level corporate vernacular, I had made her sound incredibly crass and entirely uneducated. Seeing the Parker family floundering, Tessa decided it was the perfect moment to execute her next maneuver. She turned her attention to my brother, who was sweating through his expensive, unearned cashmere. "Logan," Tessa purred, swirling the dark wine in her glass. "You were telling me last month about the massive liquidity event your tech incubator was preparing for. With the current market volatility, how are you insulating your Series A investors? Are you utilizing a standard convertible note, or have you structured a safe agreement to delay the valuation?" Logan froze. He looked at Tessa as if she had just spoken in ancient tongues. He opened his mouth, closed it, and took a desperate gulp of his wine. "Well, Tessa, you know how the market is. We like to keep things agile. We are focusing heavily on gross revenue right now. The seed rounds from 3 years ago are really paying off for the companies we founded 2 years ago." Tessa tilted her head, her smile perfectly innocent but utterly lethal. "You are paying off seed investors from 3 years ago for companies you did not found until 2 years ago? That is a fascinating manipulation of the space-time continuum. Logan." Logan swallowed hard, his face turning a mottled shade of red. He mumbled an incoherent excuse about non-disclosure agreements and aggressively focused on slicing his duck. Gideon was no longer just suspicious. He was actively analyzing the room. He was a predator who had just realized the water was full of blood. He watched my father refuse to make eye contact with anyone. He watched Logan crumbling under basic financial scrutiny. And most importantly, he watched the silent choreography of the estate. When the head sommelier approached the table with a rare vintage of Bordeaux, he did not look at my father, who was sitting at the head of the table. The sommelier looked directly at me, waiting for my fraction of a nod before pouring. Gideon saw that silent exchange. He realized exactly where the true power in the room resided. Sensing the catastrophic collapse of her entire future, Delaney made a desperate, reckless move. She tapped her crystal water glass with her silver knife, standing up slightly to command the room's attention. She was going to try to trap Gideon in a narrative he could not politely escape. "Since we are all gathered here," Delaney announced, her voice pitched an octave too high, "I think it is the perfect time to share some incredible news. Gideon and I have been discussing our shared passion for philanthropy. After the holidays, we will be officially announcing a joint project. A massive charitable initiative merging my fashion community with Vale and Wren Capital." Gideon's polite mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of absolute cold fury at being ambushed. But before he could issue a devastating correction, his Aunt Evelyn intervened. Evelyn set her silverware down with a sharp, metallic clink that echoed through the silent dining room. She fixed Delaney with a stare so intensely scrutinizing it could have peeled paint from the walls. "A joint project," Evelyn repeated, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "How very ambitious of you, Delaney. Since you are announcing it to the table, you must have the preliminary details finalized. Which jurisdiction is the legal entity registered in? Who is acting as the principal underwriter for the initial capital? And what exactly is the core philanthropic directive, legally speaking?" Delaney was completely paralyzed. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost draped in expensive silk. "Well, we are still outlining the synergies," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "It is about giving back, empowering people. The lawyers will handle the boring paperwork later." Evelyn did not blink. Synergy is a buzzword used by people who lack capital, and lawyers do not handle the paperwork later when Vale and Wren Capital is involved. They handle it before a single word is spoken. She picked up her wine glass, dismissing my sister with a look of absolute, unvarnished disgust. The illusion was dead. The silence in the room was deafening, heavy with the stench of exposed fraud. Marjorie, watching her golden child completely disintegrate under Evelyn's gaze, lost whatever shred of sanity she had left. She abandoned her fake aristocratic accent entirely. She leaned across the table toward me, her face twisted in genuine, ugly desperation. She lowered her voice, but in the dead, silent room, every single word carried perfectly. "Please, Skylar, stop doing this," Marjorie hissed, her voice trembling with fury and panic. "Stop showing off. Do not embarrass your sister tonight of all nights. This is exactly why I told you to stay home with those sticky children. Your miserable single mother image is ruining everything we built." The words hung in the air, a vile, undeniable confession of their cruelty. She had just admitted, in front of the billionaire she was trying to con, that she had banished her own daughter and grandchildren from Christmas solely to protect a fabricated image. Gideon slowly placed his linen napkin onto the table. He turned his head, his sharp eyes moving from my mother's terrified face to Delaney's tear-filled eyes, and finally, he looked directly at me. The pieces of the puzzle had finally locked into place in his brilliant mind. "So," Gideon asked, his voice deadly quiet, echoing in the vast, tense space, "who is the actual host of this dinner?" The silence hanging in the dining room after Gideon's question was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The oxygen seemed to vanish from the space, leaving my family gasping for a lifeline that did not exist. Delaney, terrified of the impending revelation and driven by sheer, unfiltered panic, made a breathtakingly reckless maneuver. She shot up from her chair, her crystal goblet clinking sharply against her diamond ring. She ignored Gideon's question completely, pasting a dazzling, manic smile across her pale face. "In the spirit of the season," Delaney announced, her voice trembling slightly but projected loudly across the mahogany table, "the Parker family would like to take this beautiful moment to announce our annual holiday philanthropic pledge." My father, Stephen, immediately grabbed the lifeline she threw into the chaotic waters. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the secure, unbothered aura of a benevolent patriarch. "Absolutely we are," he boomed, adjusting his silk tie with sweaty fingers. "We firmly believe in giving back to the community that sustains us. I will be initiating a wire transfer of $50,000 to the Coastal Marine Conservation Fund the very moment we conclude our dessert course. It is a long-standing family tradition." I did not flinch. I did not smile. I simply caught the eye of my executive assistant, Mara, who had been standing discreetly near the entrance to the butler's pantry, monitoring the flow of the service. She knew exactly what to do because I had anticipated their desperate need to perform. Tonight's dinner was originally scheduled as a private donor alignment for the exact conservation fund Stephen had blindly named, a detail I had subtly left on the embossed menus. Mara walked forward with practiced elegance, carrying a sleek silver tablet equipped with a biometric and encrypted payment terminal utilized specifically for high-tier, instantaneous charity pledges. "How incredibly generous of you." "Stephen," I said, my voice smooth, polite, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Since the regional director of the Conservation Fund is actually joining us for coffee in less than an hour, we can process that magnificent pledge right now. It will save you the trouble of a wire transfer on a holiday weekend." Mara placed the heavy silver terminal smoothly beside my father's gold-rimmed plate. Marjorie's eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate triumph. In her deluded mind, she thought this was their ultimate salvation, the perfect proof of their wealth. "Go ahead, Stephen," Marjorie urged, her voice tight and high-pitched. "Show Gideon and Evelyn our commitment to the cause." Stephen, sweating so profusely his collar was soaked, pulled a heavy black credit card from his designer wallet. His hands were shaking visibly. He swiped the card through the terminal. The machine emitted a sharp, angry electronic tone. A bright red word flashed across the high-definition screen. "Declined." Stephen let out a nervous, breathless chuckle. "Must be a temporary hold," Stephen said with a brittle laugh. Let me call the bank. He swiped it a second time, pressing harder. Another sharp beep. Another red screen. He scrambled to pull a different card from his wallet, his breathing growing ragged. He tried a third time. Another failure. The repetitive electronic chirps of financial rejection echoed through the cavernous dining room like a judge's gavel striking wood. Tessa leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. Her dark eyes were completely devoid of pity, glowing with the thrill of a prosecutor cornering a hostile witness. Sometimes international fraud algorithms flag those encrypted terminals. Stephen, Tessa offered, her voice a deadly, soothing silk. But since I am a licensed corporate notary and we have the standard pledge forms right here in the house, we can simply secure the donation against a corporate asset. Just provide the legal entity name and the primary address of the holding company backing your family trust. I can run a quick verification through the state registry right now on my phone to secure the tax deduction for you before the year ends. Stephen sputtered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. Driven into a corner, he rattled off an address for a premium commercial property in downtown Boston, a building he used to manage over a decade ago. Tessa tapped the screen of her phone for exactly 5 seconds. She did not even look up when she delivered the fatal blow. That is incredibly strange, Tessa mused loudly, ensuring every single person at the table heard her. The public registry shows that particular building was foreclosed upon exactly 42 months ago and is currently owned by a commercial banking syndicate out of New York. You must have misspoken. Gideon slowly pushed his chair back from the table. The polite aristocratic mask he had worn all evening had completely vanished. It was replaced by the terrifying, clinical gaze of a man who dismantles fraudulent corporations for a living. He looked at Delaney, then at Stephen, the sheer staggering magnitude of their deception finally crystallizing in his brilliant mind. They were not simply exaggerating the ownership of a summer home to look impressive. They were actively fabricating financial structures, inventing philanthropic pledges, and lying about corporate assets to manipulate a high-net-worth individual into a binding legal and personal relationship. He realized he was not sitting at a family dinner. He was the target of a calculated, predatory fraud. Before Gideon could utter a single, devastating word of condemnation, Evelyn Vale raised her hand, silencing the entire room with a simple, authoritative gesture. She did not look at my panicked parents. She did not look at my trembling sister. She looked exclusively at me. Her sharp eyes crinkled at the corners, recognizing the absolute brilliant brutality of the trap I had allowed my family to walk into. You know, Evelyn said, her voice commanding the grand space with effortless, terrifying authority. When the board of directors at Vale and Wren Capital received the strategic restructuring proposal from Blackshore Recovery Group last month, I found the architectural logic of the document utterly fascinating. It was ruthless, efficient, and entirely uncompromising. I made a point to memorize the name of the chief executive officer who authored it. Evelyn set her glass down with exquisite care, her gaze never leaving mine. I must say, Skylar Parker, the way you manage a hostile takeover in the boardroom is nearly as impressive as the way you manage one at your own dinner table. Do you wish to conclude this rather painful demonstration now? Or shall we let them keep digging their own graves? The sound of my full name and my actual corporate title, leaving the mouth of one of the most powerful women in global finance, struck my family like a physical, concussive blow. The illusion did not just crack, it violently shattered into 1,000 unfixable pieces. Logan leaped up from his chair, his face pale with pure panic, turning viciously on my sister. You told us this was a sure thing, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Delaney. You told us if we played along, he would propose and we could pay off the mezzanine debt before the house was seized. Delaney shrieked right back at him, tears streaming down her face, her carefully curated makeup running in dark, ugly streaks. Mother told me to do it. She planned the whole rental scheme. She said we just needed one night to trap him into an engagement. Marjorie, realizing her entire universe was collapsing in real time, abandoned all pretense of dignity, class, or maternal pride. She practically lunged across the mahogany table toward me, knocking over a crystal water goblet. Her hands were clasped together in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "Skylar, please," Marjorie begged, her voice a wet, sobbing whisper that echoed miserably in the large room. "Just tell them it is a misunderstanding. Just save us for the rest of the night. Do not let them leave like this. You are my daughter. You owe us that much." I looked at the woman who had banished me from her life a mere 3 days prior. I looked at the woman who had called my beautiful, innocent children a liability to her fake empire. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout to be heard. I placed my linen napkin neatly beside my plate and slowly stood up. The entire room fell into a deathly, breathless silence, waiting for my judgment. I looked at my mother's tear-stained face, at my father's broken, defeated posture, at my sister's ruined, pathetic disguise. And finally, my gaze drifted toward the heavy oak doors leading to the east wing, where my children were sleeping peacefully, completely untouched by the poison in this room. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice ringing out with crystalline, absolute clarity. "The hardest part of tonight was not dismantling your pathetic lies. It was not proving your bankruptcy, or exposing your calculated fraud to the exact people you desperately tried to exploit." I paused, letting the cold, heavy reality of my words settle over them like a burial shroud. "The hardest part was deciding who would be allowed to step into my children's lives after tonight. And looking at you all right now, I have finally made my decision." I remained standing, letting the profound silence wash over the dining room. Every eye was fixed upon me, waiting for the final verdict. I did not need to scream or pound my fists against the mahogany table. True power is absolute stillness. "To clarify the confusion that has plagued this evening," I began, my voice steady and echoing clearly off the vaulted ceilings. "This estate, held under the Harbor Lantern Trust, is entirely my property. I am the sole owner and the primary operator. Tonight was designed to be a private, highly secure holiday reception for my strategic corporate partners and distinguished guests." I turned my gaze toward Gideon and Evelyn Vale, who were watching me with intense, unbroken focus. My family was never on the guest list. Exactly 3 days ago, I received a phone call from my mother. She explicitly uninvited me and my 2 young children from their holiday gathering. I was informed that my existence as a single working mother presented a messy, chaotic image that would jeopardize Delaney's desperate attempt to secure a wealthy husband. They drove here tonight under the delusion that I was merely a hired coordinator managing a rental property, and they attempted to hijack my home to continue their performance. A small, pathetic whimper escaped Delaney's lips, but she did not dare look up from her lap. Marjorie covered her face with her trembling hands. I continued, walking the length of the table at an unhurried pace. I simply allowed the truth to present itself. You all witnessed Marjorie attempting to degrade my professional standing to elevate her own. You heard Delaney weave elaborate fictions about phantom philanthropic foundations and non-existent supply chains. You watched Logan fumble through basic financial terminology regarding his imaginary tech incubator. And you saw Stephen attempt to wire tens of thousands of dollars to a charity from bank accounts that have been empty for years. I paused at the head of the table and gave a slight nod to Mara. She stepped forward from the shadows, carrying a thick, sealed manila folder. She handed it to me, and I placed it squarely in the center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. The dull thud of the paper hitting the wood sounded like a vault door slamming shut. "There is one final piece of business to clarify," I announced, tapping the cover of the folder. 3 weeks ago, an investment entity operating under the corporate umbrella of Blackshore Recovery Group engaged in a standard acquisition of distressed, overdue debt from a secondary market liquidator. That package included the heavily defaulted first, second, and third mortgages on the suburban property currently occupied by Stephen and Marjorie Parker. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it stole the breath from his lungs. The reality of his complete financial ruin had finally caught up to him. "I did not purchase this debt to humiliate you," I told my parents, my tone shifting from corporate detachment to a firm, unyielding boundary. I purchased it to permanently terminate the toxic emotional manipulation you have weaponized against me for decades. There will be no more tearful phone calls begging me to save the family. There will be no more leveraging guilt to extract bailouts. From this exact second forward, our relationship is exclusively legal, entirely transparent, and bound by strict, non-negotiable deadlines. I looked at the broken, sweating figures of the people who shared my blood. I am not going to throw you out into the freezing cold without resources. I have arranged for a private car to transport you to a reputable hotel near the airport. Your accommodations have been paid for the next 2 nights. Inside this folder is a comprehensive list of independent financial advisors and bankruptcy counselors. However, let me be absolutely clear. You will receive 0 cash from me. I will not interfere to halt the foreclosure process. And most importantly, you are permanently barred from any access to my children. Gideon Vale slowly rose from his chair. He did not look angry. He looked entirely relieved to have avoided a massive catastrophe. He turned to Delaney, his voice devoid of any warmth. I think it goes without saying that whatever this brief association was, it ends tonight. Do not attempt to contact my office. He then turned to me, offering a polite, respectful nod. Skylar, I sincerely apologize for bringing this disruption into your home. I was entirely unaware of the fraudulent circumstances. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Gideon, I replied smoothly. Evelyn Vale stood next to her nephew, buttoning her tailored jacket. She looked at the weeping, shattered Parker family, and then back to me. A genuine smile touched her sharp features. Skylar, your ability to execute a surgical extraction of a hostile element while maintaining complete operational control is remarkable. I have profound respect for how you handled this crisis. I look forward to our official strategy meetings in the new year. Have a wonderful holiday. As the Vales moved toward the grand foyer to collect their coats, Tessa Rowan stood up from her seat next to my brother. Logan reached out a desperate hand toward her, but she stepped back, her eyes cold and calculating. Logan, Tessa said, her voice dropping into a chilling, professional register. Lose my number. If you attempt to contact me or my firm, I will personally file a restraining order. She turned her back on him completely and walked over to my side of the table. I am going to stay behind, she told me quietly. If you need a licensed attorney to witness the exit or sign off on an incident report to secure the perimeter, I am on the clock. Thank you, Tessa, I said, offering her a genuine smile. I appreciate the solidarity. The Parker family's exit was a pathetic, silent procession. They did not argue. They did not try to negotiate. The sheer weight of their exposed lies and the crushing reality of their financial doom had stripped them of their final shreds of unearned arrogance. They dragged their cheap luggage across the marble floors and walked out the heavy oak doors into the bitter winter wind. The private car was waiting. The moment the taillights disappeared down the winding driveway, the heavy iron gates closed and locked. The toxic infection had been successfully purged. The estate breathed a collective silent sigh of relief. I left the dining room, walked up the sweeping staircase, and pushed open the doors to the east wing. The sterile, high-stakes corporate armor melted away the second I stepped into the room. The space was filled with the soft, twinkling lights of our massive Christmas tree and the sweet smell of sugar cookies. Liam and Chloe were sitting on the plush rug, wearing matching holiday pajamas, laughing hysterically as they tried to assemble a complex wooden toy. My best friend Sarah was sitting on the sofa, smiling warmly as she watched them. I sank down onto the rug, pulling both of my children into my arms. They smelled like vanilla and pure, uncorrupted innocence. I buried my face in their hair, listening to their beautiful laughter. As I held them tightly, I realized the ultimate climax of the evening was not the flawless execution of a corporate takedown. It was not watching my family's house of cards collapse under the weight of their own greed. The true victory was the profound, quiet peace of this exact moment. I had permanently locked the heavy iron door against the darkness. I had ensured that my children would grow up in a world where they never had to fear being discarded, where they never had to shrink themselves, and where their Christmas would always be safe, warm, and completely free from the burden of fitting into anyone else's broken image. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. I invite you to subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by pressing the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.